Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this briefly, so this is a little bit of review, but factors are a special character vector that have predefined levels. And so the values have some sort of level meaning. So we can change a character list or vector to be a factor by using the factor function. And that will automatically create levels based on alphanumeric order. There's also another function to create factors that we'll talk about that does it a little bit differently. And so then you can use the levels function to see those levels. So here it's starting with blue, then red, then yellow, going in alphanumeric order. There's a 4cats package that has a really funny hex sticker with lots of cats. And that's extremely helpful for working with factors. And so it actually allows us to create factors using an as_factor function that will give us the order in the first appearance. So here red would be first, and then blue, and then yellow, instead of alphanumeric. Okay, so we're gonna work with some data to really demonstrate kind of the nitty-gritty details of what happens when we work with factors. And so to create that data, we're gonna have some data about student absences for students in an American high school in the grades of freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And so that'll be a variable that's categorical, but it has an order. You know, you start in freshman year, then you do sophomore, junior, senior. And so to create this, we're going to use the Tibble function. We're going to use the sample function to create a random sequence of integers from 0 to 7 for a range of absences. We're going to allow replacements because some students can have the same number of absences. And we're going to have 32 hypothetical students. And since there are 4 grades, freshman, junior, senior, sophomore, and when we multiply 8 by 32, we're going to want to repeat the grade values 8 times. And then we'll use the setSeed function to make sure that our data is the same since we're using a random sample. So if you wanted to follow along, you could create this data like so. All right, so if we take a look at our data here, we see that we have a column of absences, so the number of days that a student was absent, and the grade that they're in. And note here that we have the CHR here in our Tibble indicating that the grade variable is a character variable. So R doesn't think that there's any sort of order associated with this, and so it's just going to assume that it should be alphabetical. And so the order it's going to do is freshman first, but then junior, then senior, sophomore, and that's probably not what we want. What we want is probably freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And so if we were to plot this automatically, just using the grade as a character class. So here I'm using my ggplot function, and I'm making a box plot, and I'm making it theme BW, and I'm changing it so all the font labels are size 16. Here I see that it's in this alphanumeric order. And if I'm used to seeing it as freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, this isn't really easy for me to interpret. And so I would rather have it plotted differently. So to do that, I can change it to a factor. So I can use the factor function or the as_factor function. Here I'm going to use the mutate function to update the grade variable and overwrite it so that grade is now a factor. and I need to specify how I want my levels to be so that they're changed in the way that I want, because otherwise they'd actually be continuing still in this alphanumeric order. So I'm going to specify this order. And now when I look at the levels and I need to pull out the values of grade from this new object, data object, I'm creating a new one where it has a factor class. Now I have these levels, and this is what I want. So when I take a look at this, again, the order appears differently than maybe, this is the order that it appears with sophomore and first, a sophomore first. If I plot this now, so basically the data hasn't changed. The only thing here that's changed is that this is now a factor. But when I plot the data, so this is the same exact code, there's nothing changed here at all. It now plots it in the order I want automatically. And that can be super important. And this is true not just for plots, but for how we look at the data and how we calculate things with the data or analyze the data. So if I just use the arrange function and arrange by grade, and I'm using here the original data set where I just have a character version of grade. So see, remember it's character. I see that it goes from freshman to junior to senior, which is not what I want. But if I arrange by grade using my factor version, so now grade's a factor, I see that it's freshman, sophomore, junior, etc. And this is also true if I summarize the data and try calculating things or making tables. So here I'm looking at the total number of absences across each grade by using the sum function within the summarize function. And I'm grouping by grade. Here using the original data set where grade is a character, I see that I have freshman, junior, senior, sophomore. It's a little hard to read and interpret. But if I do it with the factor version, I now have changed it to the order I want. So here again, grade is factor, using the factor data set and the same code, but now it's outputting the results, same results, just a different order. So here, freshman is at the top for both, but the next one's junior. And here the next one is sophomore, but it's the same values. Okay, so now we get into the real power of forecast. So it's been nice to change our plot, and now we can plot it, the way that we want to, but maybe there's certain things that we want to focus on. And so forecasts can help us to order grade in a different way. So let's say we, instead of ordering by the order that we typically see grades, we want to order the plot so that we do it based on the number of absences. So we can do that with forecasts. So we can use the forecasts package. This is just saying that I'm using this. So we could delete this section of code. And I'm using the factor reorder function. And so I can order grade by the absence variable. And so I'm just changing the way that X is going to be plotted. So the X-axis is now plotted in this order, in which grade is ordered by the number of absences. So it increases with the number of absences. So now it's easier to see that sophomore is the grade that has the highest and junior is the grade with the lowest. And that can be really nice for making your plots easy to read and quick to discern what's going on. Okay, so let's add another variable to make things a bit more complicated. We're going to also add information about tardiness, which is another word for being late to class. So we're going to add another simulated variable. So we're going to use the random sample function. And we're going to say that it ranges from 0 to 7. We're going to allow that to replace so that some students have the same number of tardiness. And we'll have it for the same number of students, 32 students. And again, we need to set some sort of seed so we have the same values. So if you wanted to follow along, this is what you would use. And so now when I look at my data factor, and note that this is using this data set where I've changed grade to a factor. So if you didn't already create this, you might get an error because we piped that in first. So now I have grade as a factor, and I have this new variable called tardy, where I have various numbers of tardiness. So if I wanted to plot both of these things, I can plot each by whatever variable I want. And so in this case, I want to plot each of the plots based on the number of either absences or tardiness. So here's the plot that we already saw before where I ordered grade by absences. And here I'm going to order grade by tardiness. And so we can see that the order is different for the two plots, but the way that it's plotted, it helps me identify which grade is doing the worst for each thing. So the sophomores are just not showing up to class at all, and the juniors are coming late. And so that can be helpful. And so automatically the x-axis is going to be labeled like this. And I left that to make it clear what we did. But we might want to rename that. But instead of this, we could maybe be really focused on absences. And so we're really focused on the sophomores and how they're showing up, the least. And so we could instead order grade by absences in our tardy plot. And so here, this is kind of useful because we can see that sophomores are not, they're not terrible, but they're not great for being tardy as well. So it depends on what pattern you're really trying to point out. And then finally, there's a factor count function of the forcats package that can be really helpful for just assessing how many of each group you have. And so you can use this for a particular variable, and you can use the proportion equals true if you want to get the actual proportion. Otherwise, it'll give you the count alone. So here I'm pulling out the grade data and I'm asking, what proportion of our data is of each grade? And here I see that it's equally 25% for each grade. So that can be a useful thing to check. Say you have very few freshmen or something, then, maybe you need to survey more data on freshmen. Okay, so in summary, factors are a special type of categorical data that have some sort of order that might be important. And automatically our character class data is going to be plotted or arranged in our tables and our analyses in alphanumeric order. But if we want something different, we would want to use a factor and change it to a factor class. And so we can use the mutate function to update an existing variable to be factor, either using the as factor function of forcats, which will do it in the order of appearance, or the factor function of base R, which does it alphanumerically. We would want to specify the levels with the levels argument to say what order we want to change it to. And we can do really fancy things with factor reorder to order a variable by another variable. So we first list the variable we want to order, and second, we list the variable we want to order by. And so how we choose which order to use kind of depends on what we're trying to convey in our plot. What's the main takeaway message from our plot? And finally, besides plotting, also arranging and tabulating our data will reflect the order that we change our factor to. Okay.